When Geoffrey Hammond suddenly died in his Bluffton, South Carolina home on June 14th, 2017, he was said to have collapsed on the floor shortly after going up to his third-story office to work. The circumstances surrounding his passing, initially attributed to natural causes by law enforcement, were far from ordinary. In a departure from his normal routine, Hammond, whose lazy day attire was business casual, was found wearing only the shorts he wore to bed and had a nearly empty stomach instead of his daily portion of coffee and breakfast. He had a gash on his forehead the size and shape of a golf club iron that went undocumented in the reports of first responders and unmentioned in the 911 call placed by his wife, Jane. Though through the relentless efforts of private investigator Joseph Dalu from Premier Group International, who has tirelessly pursued this case pro bono for years, a trove of evidence has emerged. Evidence of fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and a conspiracy to take over Jeff's wealth, estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars. Dalu also uncovered evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain. I'm Jen Wood, the Director of Research at FITSNews, and this is a continuation of our investigation into the unexplained death of Geoffrey Hammond. In this exclusive interview with Callie Lyons of FITSNews, Dalu offers insights into the investigation, critiquing its handling by law enforcement, and outlining his own conclusions regarding the events leading to Geoffrey Hammond's death.
Tell us a little bit about the case, how you became involved. I know it's been a long road. You've been looking into this for like 4 years or
Yes,
more at this
and
point.
it came to me I believe, at the end of 2018, beginning of the year 2019. I was contacted by Tara Hellman, and she had seen an episode on Dateline about a case that I had worked on, and she reached out to me. And when she did, um, when you do those type of programs, you do get a lot of people that call. You have to kind of vet them out a little bit. She did seem that she had a very interesting case, but I needed to see how serious she was about it, and just wasn't, you know, um, making all these calls, and a sense of desperation, and is there really any substance to this case? So I told her if she was serious about it, I was in California, she's going to have to fly out. And she did. And she came out, and we sat over the course of a weekend and discussed the case with her.
Wow. And really, what you've found in all these years is pretty astonishing.
Told me was astonishing, that is for certain. And at the face value, I looked at it and said, "Listen, there's a lot of content here. But what I can do, I can, if you believe that there's a forgery involved, I can definitely take a look at that and validate that and investigate that, as well as the other fraud allegations that she came up with."
Right. And after time, of course, you developed other theories and found evidence of potentially other
Oh,
crimes
right.
as
You
well.
know, when you take a look at something like this, keep in mind these are pretty serious allegations, and you have to look at the entire picture. And what I was presented with was a an adult female, parents divorced when she was young, and the father remarries and has a stepmom, and the struggles that those type of relationships can present in the beginning, and moving forward onto he passed away. And I have to look at the fact that just because you're not in the will doesn't mean that you're intended to. And that was what her concern was at the very beginning was, look, I there's some concerns I have about the will. It doesn't look right based on what I know of my dad. On the other hand, I had to present to her and go, a lot of times these things do happen. And when it comes to a death, people seem to fight over money. It doesn't matter how amicable you were before, or what kind of relationship, if it was good or indifferent. The fact is, greed uh, definitely comes into play, and I have to consider that. And when I looked at it, um, I found definitely uh, elements to a crime with fraud, absolutely. But then you have to look at motive. What is the purpose of this? And if there is a financial gain, substantial, the way that was with Mr. Hammond's estate, well over 300 million, actually, by the time they sold the company, the property, and things like that, I have to take that into account. And when there's so many things that are leading and surrounded by just the forgery of uh, titles to vehicles, a very suspicious real estate transaction, the parties involved in every aspect of that transaction alone, just the real estate transaction alone, definitely led me to look in other areas and look, well, what would someone have the motive to do this for? I mean, you're telling me that you suspect your father died of natural causes, but you suspect there's something suspicious about it. What was suspicious about it? And the more she explained, and the more I investigated and interviewing people, there was too much content there to just walk away from it. And evidence, the circumstantial evidence that came out is just unbelievable. There's just a wealth of evidence there.
What was the turning point for you when you thought there's something nefarious about the way he died?
Well, there's a lot of things to it. Now, being a police officer before, I've been in affluent neighborhoods where we're responding to medical aids, right? And you take a look where Mr. Hammond lived, both the Boca residence and in South Carolina. There was very, very wealthy, high net worth individuals that go there to retire, live there, and a lot of professionals. So it's not uncommon for me to see someone respond to medical aid as an officer, and you look at the person's age. I think he was 69 years old, and from all evidence presented in the reports and the medical first responders, there were signs that he was older and that he could have suffered a cardiac arrest or a heart attack. But then you start looking at the surrounding room where he was found. Things didn't add up. Now, I don't know Mr. Hammond. I can only go based on what I learned from Tara in the beginning. But then when it's consistent with other witnesses throughout my entire investigation, pretty much everyone I spoke to, with the exception of the main parties or principals that I feel were behind this, I believe her. And you have to look, we're all intelligent people. We have different kinds of backgrounds and experiences. But I think it's fair to say that when someone is of that age, they probably more likely died of natural causes. But you can't get around. There's as we get older, right? We have a tendency to reflect back on our parents and recognize various similarities that we're going through ourselves, right? Whether it's I can't hear you good enough like I used to, or I'm stiff in the morning, and those type of things. But generally, when you're an entrepreneur and a successful man that he was, and everyone described him pretty much the same, very stoic, very, very empathetic, and family man. But also he kept things internally about his personal life. But there's a routine that he established over the years that he lived, and everyone that knew him recognized those routines. And it would be simply getting up at the crack of dawn in the morning and having a routine of basically getting ready for the day, shower, breakfast, and on with his day very early. When you're faced now with, he allegedly woke up at 9:30 in the morning, has to get up into work for a alleged phone call that never found evidence of, nor did he try to follow up on that phone call like most people would. If I was scheduled for a call like we are today, and I don't hear from you, I'm going to call and say, are we still on for today? In fact, I think I sent you a text. Are we still on at this time? So those are typical
Right.
characteristics of a successful entrepreneur and consistent with everyone, how they viewed him, how they perceived him, and their experiences with him. So that to me stood out more than anything else. It's just like a regular man with a standard routine all of a sudden is out of that routine, which is very difficult for me. It doesn't mean anything really bad, but I definitely have to consider that. So then I start looking into other things as well.
So basically, you didn't buy the fact that he was found in the shorts he wore to bed mid-morning in the office that he allegedly went up to so that he could work.
Yes,
Is that right?
and that is basically he's found in sleeping shorts or underwear, boxers, whatever it was. And typically, most men of that generation too typically just get up in the morning, get dressed right away. Whether they shower the night before or shower that morning, they just get up and they're ready for the before they even leave and have their first morning coffee. And that may vary a little bit, but for the most part, that's the way it is. And with that kind of discipline, I think, and routine and pattern, I think it's safe to say that something is wrong. Something is out of the ordinary. Again, the other things that are more um, that are presented in a much more dramatic way should scream at you. But I look at the subtle things, right? And also my job is to sit here and tell her, hey, this is not uncommon. This is I could see this happening. I mean, how is it every day that you're going to do the same thing? You might do it on the weekend. I could see that, right? But during the week, she might have an argument.
Right. Sure. And then, of course, at some point, you had heard people who went to the wake and the funeral describe the
Yes.
head injury.
Um, you know what? I I think I was probably Tara's enemy at times because I would sit there and I would play a devil's advocate, so to speak, and but also looking at things realistically, both from a law enforcement perspective, how they're going to view something, and this understanding that she's faced with a very traumatic situation of the loss of her father, and that she may still be grieving, however long it may be. So I take those in consideration, and you have to be delicate around it. But everything she told me, it did seem, again, based on what she said, okay, I could see that. But when you talk to other people and that witnessed certain events of maybe that what led up to the end of his life, his relationship with his wife, the way he structured his company, the people in the company, the issues and concerns that he had with them, and then you take it to the funeral, and everyone consistently told me he had a big gash on top of his head. Now, that could mean different things too. Well, I haven't really, I wasn't there, so I can't really determine. But you could get some people to say you're going to have some discoloration, or it's obvious that it's makeup, or whatever the situation is. But they all consistently described, no, it was a gash. It was like indented into his forehead, and they all described it very similar, like a blunt object, like a fire stick poker you would for firewood at a fireplace mantle, or a golf club. And uh, I had to look at those and go, well, that's a lot to say than just discoloration or a few abrasions. Uh, the fact that they described it 3 inches in length and probably a good 2 inches wide, with that showed the indentation into the person's forehead. It's not just at the surface level. I had some concerns about that. That's for certain.
And at some point, you got maybe a closer look at
Yes, I
that
managed to
situation.
obtain a photograph of Mr. Hammond while he was in the coffin, and uh, I will be honest. Jane's the one that gave me that photo, and what concerned me the most about that, I could the gash or the markings on his head, the way that was described to me, in a photograph, took me by surprise. That I wasn't expecting it to be as noticeable as they described. What was interesting about that, I'm still looking at this photo. I could picture it in my head, and it. Jane made a very interesting comment to me. She stated, I'd never looked at that mark on his lip. He's got a cut on his lip. He must have got that when he fell and hit the table. Doesn't address the huge and obvious gash that is discolored, red, bruising, deep burgundy color at all. And I was actually embarrassed and dumbfounded. I didn't even know how to respond to that. I really didn't. She addresses something that I had to zoom in on the picture to look and find, because of one that hits you so hard and fast is the marking on his head.
It's pretty astounding. No matter how many descriptions you've heard people tell you, to see it is, it just hits you
Right.
differently.
It does. And there's even more to that than just the physical appearance of it. There's little details, like I told you earlier. I have to look at everything. And I'm not about to, although I was quite surprised it was consistent with the witness statements, I was now recalling all the other little tiny things that they had told me when I interviewed them that attended the funeral. And it was markings on Jane's hand, or bruising on both wrists, as if someone would grip. And I had to even show her a picture. Is this what you mean? On a similar situation where it was bruising based on a tight grasp on someone's wrist. And they said exactly like that on both wrists. And not just that they noticed it, but Jane pointed out to them. I don't know how I got these bruises on my wrist. It must have happened while I was trying to roll him on his back, meaning Mr. Hammond, to provide CPR, which I believe in the 911 tape she did not know how to do CPR. And in fact, she alleged to be a registered nurse, which we also investigated and found no evidence of her being attending the college that she stated, based on the website at the time that she has listed, and no evidence of her being licensed in the state of California, and no reference of her holding a job as a registered nurse. I believe at one point she worked as a receptionist or some type of records manager in or a medical doctor, a private practice. But that was the extent of her medical experience that we found.
Oh, it seems like we're seeing a bit of a trend here when it comes to the things that she says.
Yes, just about everything she said that I found, I couldn't validate based on her presentation of whatever she told me, whatever she told witnesses, whatever she discussed, and people that knew her over the period of years. It was interesting, too, that out of the people that I was skeptic about and even contacting because they were very close to Jane and Jeff or Paul, was that everyone, they had to kind of feel me out. Once I started asking this series of questions, saying I was suspicious about the manner in which he had passed away, and it wasn't long after that they would go, well, we kind of got suspect too. The only reason we're friends with him is because we loved Jeff. Jeff was an amazing, and one of allegedly the family told me, meaning Tara and other members of the family said, no, this one particular friends of theirs, she's close to the wife, And the wife was the first one to go, I never really cared for her because she was so condescending and rude. And it seemed like she always had it. She was one of those people. She described Jane as being the one that was like a one-upper, that you can go and get a new car, and she'd have to come back with a much a more expensive car than the one that you just got. And the one that she was telling about was a Jaguar that she had received, or that she had bought. And it was only after this, according to this one witness, saying she knew I loved this particular Jaguar. She knew I liked it, and what she do, she went out and went to go get it and buy it, and just had to show me the next day. And again, I take all those statements, and I don't put it down as right away. I think people's perception are different, and I have to understand that. I have to understand that, could this be their perception? But it's the amount of people's perception that stayed consistent on that end versus Jane's perception of things on her end. And it seemed like once they realized that I was doing an investigation, they were more apt to talk to me and speak more freely.
Interesting. And of course, at the conclusion of your investigation, well, if you can call it
Yes.
concluded, because I know you're still very much involved, there was a 75-page report with many, many exhibits, and you turned that over to law enforcement thinking, okay,
So,
it's near
yes.
completion.
And that was my commitment, number one, to the client. And any client, we when we intake our clients, and we also vet them out, and the majority of the time we run background checks on our own clients to we want to be able to determine who we're working for, and whether there's some validity to it, and to get down to the truth. If we do a criminal defense work, we're not going to just try to get the client off. I tell them my job is not to get you off from the charges, but to determine whether or not law enforcement had documented all the evidence properly. And if you're telling me that you didn't do it, then tell me where I have to go and find it. But I'm also going to find other evidence to corroborate it. And that means sitting down with law enforcement or reviewing their discovery, their evidence, and then coming to my own investigation based on my findings. But it's all just based on what's reported to me, right? I can't fabricate something. And in my commitment in these cases is to look, if I believe that there is something here, I will write a very detailed report. And if it's something criminal, I will assist you or be a liaison to law enforcement, because I know what they're going to be looking for. I know what it takes to put a crime together. Although there's different states, different statutes, they're all pretty much consistent when it comes to murder or theft by false pretense and fraud. You're going to have very similar elements to it. So in putting this all together, which was a lot, I also needed, because as you know, you also investigated this, it's a very convoluted story when someone first brings it to your attention. And you have to, there's so many players involved and so many things that it's literally has everything in it. And you have to go, okay, well, again, just because you find blood, for example, doesn't mean it's the victim's blood. Just because they claim and it appears that they could have been foul play doesn't mean that there was. It's just these are circumstances that have to be looked at. And when I got done with the investigation, I said, I don't know how someone can not look at this and at the very least in law enforcement do a thorough investigation. It was like I couldn't put a bigger bow on it for them to go, here's everything that I found. There's things that I can't do, like get warrants, but I've outlined specifically what I think you would need to do to prove your case, right? They're going to have to follow up with all the same witnesses and then some, and they're going to have to interview the suspect and all the other potential conspirators, and come to their own conclusion based on the evidence that I cannot get. and that might be financial records, or sometimes I think it's better that the police interview certain witnesses uh, for whatever reason, and it could be they're going to have a tendency not to talk to me, but they may talk to law enforcement, no matter how much or how nice or how I present the situation. And in fact, there was a witness that was very scared. A couple of them were, because they're afraid of Jane. I don't know if they're afraid of her committing a heinous act like what she appears to have committed here. And again, those are only allegations, but I think they were afraid of her power and her financial status of what she could pay to have done. And again, I'm not saying that she's going to pay someone to uh, commit harm onto another person, especially murder, but you can definitely ruin somebody's life by either their career based on reputation. You can say certain things or know enough influential people that these people may never have a job again. And I found that a lot when I was interviewing these people.
She's not your mother's widow lady. She's not Betty White,
No,
right? That if that's the idea that anyone has in their head, that is not really
it's not. She
accurate.
was, when
Is that fair
when
to
I did
say?
speak with Jane under subterfuge contact, she was sweet. She was a very charming woman. Um, but I believe there was a motive there for that charm, and that I didn't even think that was going to take place, but it just kind of fell into that. But getting back to your question, when I do this and I go to law enforcement, I present them this binder, and I mean I think I showed you a picture of it, and you could probably see it sits on my desk back there, the one part of the binder, and it's got a lot of content to it, but it's not just words. It's photographs and documented evidence and witness statements and the things that are presented in such an outlandish um, circumstantial way, you can't ignore it. I would expect too when I go contact law enforcement, I tell them a couple of things. I'm retired. I don't want to waste your time. And certainly, I'd be the first person to tell a client, I'm not going to present this because I think we are wasting their time. There's nothing here. And I wouldn't have a problem with sending them on their way. At the same time, when I do take something that we spent a lot of time on, I do expect them to look at it and take it seriously. And it's like anything else. If you just do a thorough investigation, I could live with that. But what I can't live with is when they don't do their job based on either their opinion, laziness, manpower, whatever it is. They have other resources that they can do. Especially in South Carolina, you could pull in SLED, which I've often suggested to get done a lot more than what they allege they contacted SLED for. But I would expect that I wouldn't expect a detective to come back to me again and go, okay, this is um, I did end up pulling search warrants for this. And I was like, well, I would pull much beyond that if there's elements for it, because you have to understand if I'm looking for a particular evidence, I have to go beyond that scope than just what's surrounding, maybe consisting of just Jane. What did she have? And I felt at the time there was enough compelling evidence there to go outside that one scope to obtain documents based on a warrant, an affidavit, beyond just the little tiny part that they did.
Right. So when they closed the case, were you surprised?
Yes, I was. I was. I was very surprised, and after looking at some of the information based on FOIA, right, that that I know you tried to obtain and was not there. In fact, I had conversations with you where it was like, well, there's 10 files to this one particular warrant that they sought, but there's only one piece of paper to it. So what are the other 9 files that he's referring to in this, right? But what's also interesting is that he made contact with Jane after months, if not over a year, that he stated he was ready to, and he never made that contact. He didn't. He told me things that he was going to do, and he never followed through with that. I when we're discussing it in the beginning, I thought, great, this is a good detective. He's at least going to do a thorough job. Now, he's not going to create or manufacture evidence, right? He's going to follow the evidence, and I think that any good uh, detective is going to appreciate what we put together to make it at least somewhat. You wouldn't have to spend the time that I have done with the client to really get a substance of what's going on here and as to why. Just because someone believes something, again, you need more than that, right? And I would have thought he would have did a little bit more, just even out of the respect that I may be retired, but we share the same um, description of our profession.
Right. And by the way, mad respect for your work on this. Without your report, we would never have been able to do the deep dive that we were able to pursue
Okay, I'm
on this
glad you
case.
did.
You laid all the
Yeah, which is
groundwork for
what
that, and much
you're quite
appreciated.
welcome. I appreciate that someone at least can do something to bring attention to this because again, this is what bothers me when at the end of the day, someone like Tara or someone, what do they do when they can't afford me? What do they do when they have no resources to pay for an outside third party to conduct a thorough investigation, whether it's for your criminal defense or whether it's a something with your child or spouse or fraud or business acquisition, whatever it may be. There's a lot of people that can't afford uh, to hire a private investigator. And I feel sorry for those people that don't because they still need the help. Doesn't mean it's because they don't have the means to pay for it. Doesn't mean that their case should not be heard. It shouldn't be investigated. That's what law enforcement is supposed to do. They're supposed to do this. Now, granted, law enforcement's going to have to put things in abeyance or whatever based on priority caseload. But to me, I don't care if you think it's just a sweet little old lady, Betty White. You need to look at it more so that she could possibly be a Cruella de Vil. And if someone had their life taken from them, they owe it to the victim and the victim's family, not just Tara, but all the people that worked for him, all his clients, people that respected him. And you could even go as far as someone like me, because based on what I learned of the man, what an incredible individual. I would have loved to at least shook his hand because he had an incredible life and background.
Absolutely. So, what is it that you think happened to cause the death of Geoffrey
I
Hammond?
think that he was probably prepared to ask for a divorce, maybe something he probably contemplated on for a year, and in the last 6 months was getting right down to it. There was some information that he was um, looking at seeking an attorney for what I don't know. I think that she caught wind of it, and with people like Jane and everything that she displayed up based on our findings, she liked to control. She liked the upper echelon, the fact that she was very wealthy. And in fact, if you just listen to the 911 call, it appears in one of the most traumatic experiences you could have in your life. She's more concerned that the dispatcher asked her if it was a residence or a mobile home. And her reply was, no, it's a house. Now, one could look at that and say that maybe she took that as, don't you know what the area is that you dispatch? Or I'm offended you would think that I would live in a mobile home. And based on everything else, I'm going to lean towards the mobile home perception. But I think she caught wind of that, and she went to sleep. He went to sleep. They went to bed, and he either died of asphyxiation, suffocation, by a pillow over his head. There may have been a struggle based on him trying to grasp the bruising on her wrists. And I think when the struggle was getting too much, she another party was there, or she took a blunt instrument and struck him on the head, or maybe she did that first, and then that didn't do it, so she continued on with suffocation, because there's evidence of that based on just the autopsy and the description of their findings, right? And so that's something you can't ignore. And I do think there was another person involved, because I don't think that, number one, Jane would have risked doing it herself in fear that she could be overpowered. So either she drugged him in some way the evening before over a period of time, and that wasn't working. There's some speculation on that based on evidence. And or there was someone else there, because in the 911 tape, you can clearly hear what appears to be a male voice in the background. After law enforcement confirmed, we confirmed that there was no male dispatcher in the room on duty at the time of the 911 call. And with our experts, we found that that particular voice was definitely coming on the side of the caller. So, other screaming evidence, no matter what, they didn't even follow up on. And if you're going to use the excuse that it was out of his jurisdiction, because that was one of the things that I looked at of Boca, it's the motive. You follow the evidence. You don't stop evidence when it gets to the state line or county line. You follow the evidence to confirm it, because that's the whole package. If the murder happened there, or unexpected death that has extremely suspicious circumstances, you're not going to stop and just go, well, sorry, it's in the next city over. That's somebody else's case. I'm not going to go there. No. People don't all live in the same city they kill. But I do think that he died of suffocation. I do think that it could be a combination of blunt force trauma and poisoning or drugging.
And interestingly, those are the three specific medical conditions that the independent medical experts
Yes.
came up with when they reviewed the autopsy.
And I'm not afraid to look at this stuff, even I'm not a medical expert at all. Don't have any medical training whatsoever. But when you investigate various types of crimes, and especially when it's a murder, you become familiar with certain medical terms, causes of death, similar situations. But we even went out of our way to seek not just one medical profession to give their professional experience and opinion, but three on that. And even then, I know there's additional more. They just didn't produce a report, and it was all consistent. They all said the same thing. So if they can do it.
And just to be clear, these guys weren't sitting at the same table. They weren't in the same room talking to each other.
Correct. All independent.
If from what I understand, three
individuals,
right.
3 independent, separate requests who did not refer to one or the other, or had knowledge of that.
Interesting. So what happens to the case? Sorry.
What happens to the case now, or what should have happened? Okay.
Yeah. Well, you go wherever you want to go with that
what
one.
Should have happened, they should have done a thorough investigation, like I said, and they didn't. I had conversations with the investigator, and he said, understand that I have a supervisor that's putting pressure on me. Well, what does that mean? Putting pressure on what? It's certainly not to get it done, more or less like just hurry up and move it off your plate. That's not a thorough investigation. You don't have the time to do that. Where it should go to a trier of fact. I think there's enough just on our investigation alone, right? Which I know is nowhere near enough because you have to follow up on what I did. You have to get those search warrants. If I was going to speculate that your cell phone records would indicate that you were based on cell phone tower information, or that you had no contact whatsoever with a particular individual, and I call up your supervisor because it's a work phone, and they say no, there doesn't seem to be anything suspicious on it. In fact, all the calls on here look consistent with her specific job duties. Uh, okay, that's fine. Now let me get the records and review it myself. Because like anything else, and like every good investigator, you can't get tunnel vision. And in my office, we roundtable a lot of the investigations. And I got people younger than me that offer their opinion and experience, and people way older than I am, and I'm old, that have far more experience at homicide investigations and so forth, but that have rendered their opinion, reviewed the evidence, reviewed all the documentation, and we come up with uh, basically an overall conclusion that definitely needs to be investigated. And nor am I saying that, look, this is what happened. There's so much evidence there that I really feel strongly. I'd be surprised if he actually did die of natural causes. Absolutely 100%.
Well, clearly you are not an individual who
No.
gives up, especially when confronted with a
Yes,
challenge.
I know you and I have had conversations
So,
about that. Yes, yes.
right? So where do you go with this next?
Uh, you know, if if the doors open, because we have to understand some things are political. At the same time, they're just not necessarily political, but there's also good and bad manners to it, right? So I try to give every opportunity to the sheriff's department. I've reached out to them saying, "Hey, look, this this is going to be embarrassing if this isn't done, right? This is just common common sense." Other ways of approaching, whether a prosecutor or I think they call them solicitors in South Carolina, or even going above to the next level of command within the agency, which I did at Boca, and basically one of their commanders just showed no interest whatsoever. I was more of a nuisance than anything else. And to me, I can only go so far there because at some point I'm not going to keep going up the food chain because it's not, maybe it is. And I don't give up. But I also know when law enforcement just shuts the door, it's pretty much done. Now, all we need in this particular case really is someone to seriously take a look at it, understand the liability alone for the county of Beaufort, right? The I would not, as a sheriff or a chief of a police for some agency, I would look at this and go, look, whether there is evidence there or not, you better do a thorough investigation because I don't want to look this on my watch. I don't want to be known that we didn't do something for an individual when it was clearly our responsible. Because one thing I don't want, I'll back you up, I'll support you, I believe in you, otherwise you wouldn't be working for me. But what I don't want is to go and be questioned on some national press conference as to why we didn't do something or act on something. Even if I have other people below me and I delegate it, it's my ultimate responsibility. And I would be embarrassed if this was my department. Absolutely. I would not want to have anything, any part of it. So I can only do so much. And I told the client that, but really, when are other people, whether it's politicians, whether it's the citizens of South Carolina, what if it happens to them? What if the next one isn't just an elderly person that looks like the cause of death, right? I guarantee you, if whatever happened in this investigation happened to a politician, a high ranking police officer, commander, a public official, a celebrity, I can almost guarantee that there would be some thorough investigations being conducted, 100%. So are we saying that the citizens of Beaufort County aren't worth the time and effort? It's just it is what it is. It's some old man that just died. That old man definitely was going strong and ran a hell of a company from what I could see, and a lot of people respected that individual. A lot of people. Look, in business you're going to have issues, right? You can't satisfy everyone. But what I did notice was a continuous pattern on his part of consistency, of respect, and generosity too.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Yeah. And yet, if his body is never exhumed, if a second autopsy is never performed, his death might remain
I
unexplained.
think what's sad to that, it won't be unexplained because we have an explanation for it, right? Um, what's sad about that comment is there's no justice of even uh, Our Lady Justice, right? I have a tattoo of Lady Justice on my arm, and people do variations of it, right? But I wanted the original because she is supposed to be blindfolded. And some people nowadays would like to have it blindfolded. Maybe she's peeking out underneath. No, that's not justice. You have to take everything. And even if you both strongly believe and you know this person with every ounce of you may be guilty of this particular crime, if a thorough investigation is done, and I mean a thorough investigation, they do everything that they should. They rely on the resources that they have available, and if need be, request assistance from another agency. Then that officer and detective could at least put his head down at night. He might be upset that someone got away with something that he believes, but we're not God. If it doesn't go in front of a trier of fact, and even if it does, and they get acquitted, then we accept it. But at least they know they did a good job. At least they know that if it happened to anyone else in their city, they're going to get the same quality of work. But you win some and you lose some. And the one who's get that most, remember back in the day of the mafia, it was like, you got me, it's okay. And the feds on the other end would be like, okay, you got away with it this time. But someday you're going to screw up and I'm going to have you. And the most of them were gentlemen. They were crooks. They were bad guys, but there was some type of a common gentleman agreement, right? It's either you got the evidence or you don't, right? You either followed the evidence, and again, I've seen a lot of things in law enforcement is you enforce the law by the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, right? And people have to understand that, right? And I'm okay with that. Because technically, if you were speeding down the freeway and the speed limit is 65, and I clocked you going 66, I could technically pull you over and give you a citation for that. And you'll pay a fine for that. Does that do you any good? Does that build up the relationship between the citizens and law enforcement? No. But moreover, is that really being a human being? Is that treating someone else with respect? That, look, you were speeding. It's not even worth pulling you over, right? Because you look at the other things that the officer could get hit by a car accident can happen, the driver could get hurt, whatever the situation is. But it is the letter of the law, but we don't do that. We enforce by the spirit of the law, because I do think things have to be looked at holistically, and you have to weigh it, right? And if they determined that there was not even as much circumstantial evidence, if there was just a percentage of circumstantial evidence, I could live with that. But when you have so much content to it, and one after the other, the only reason why I didn't interview the suspects, because any smart person would sit there and go, I don't have to talk to you. They don't even have to talk to the police, right? Get an attorney. An old homicide investigator told me one time, if you commit a murder and you feel like talking about it, lock yourself in the closet and talk to yourself, because they all talk. And as we saw in this case, may not been short of just saying I killed him, but there was definitely indicators in there that were another version of how he was found when he died. So that would have been the 7th or 8th version from what I gathered from the witnesses. And those are witness statements. All they had to do was go verify it. It's not like I'm just making it up and hope you believe it. I want them to go check it out, right? If you committed murder and you wanted me to defend you, you better hope I investigate you and try to prove you committed that murder. Because if I do everything I possibly can to try to show that you committed that murder and I can't find anything, then I've done my job. And you should feel restful at night that, hey, he did everything he possibly could and there is no evidence of it, right? So whether I'm innocent, I'm going to want someone to investigate that for me and go, yeah, look at me, whatever you need. I want you to dig up every stone, because if they're saying I did this, I'm telling you there's no evidence of it. So I have nothing to worry about. But knock yourself out and I'll assist any way I can.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your good
I
work on
thank
this
you. I
case.
mean, journalists like you have a hard job as well. And you did an awful lot of investigating. So thank you for taking a serious look at this. I'm glad somebody did. At least my work wasn't completely ignored.
Well, let's hope it doesn't end here.
To uncover the latest developments in the investigation into the unexplained death of Geoffrey Hammond, head over to FITSNews.com. Our latest installment delves into the findings of independent medical experts who have identified potential causes of Hammond's demise, backed by compelling evidence. If you have any information that could illuminate the circumstances surrounding Jeff Hammond's death, we urge you to reach out to Joseph Dalu via Premier Group International. Your input could be instrumental in bringing closure to this perplexing case. Unsolved Carolinas, sponsored by our friends at Bamberg Legal, is a series by FITSNews devoted to shining a spotlight on cases which have fallen off the front page. We hope to tell the stories of individuals who are seeking answers and justice on behalf of their lost loved ones. We dive deeper into their stories, get to know them through their families and friends, and hopefully help find answers for those they have left behind. In every unsolved case, someone out there could know something that provides a missing link, a critical clue that could bring peace to a family in pain and help them write the next chapter of their stories, even if it is the final chapter. If you know someone who is missing or has been a victim of an unsolved homicide, email their story to research@fitsnews.com. That's research@FITSNEWS.com. The more stories we share, the more hope we can spread.